I find it fascinating because there are things that I don't understand why we don't get here. Why do we not get ospreys here? You know, it's not like latitude-wise we're out of their range, because you get them in Scotland at 54 degrees north. We have these massive freshwater bodies stuffed full of trout, but we don't get ospreys. And yet ospreys are migratory in a lot of parts of the world. So it's not like they couldn't get here. We don't have willy wagtails and magpie larks and things. So there are just these barriers. That Bass Strait is more of a barrier than I perhaps expected it to be.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Birding Today podcast, where birders come together to discuss the joy of birding. I'm your host, Guillaume Doerig. Today's guest has been interested in wildlife and birds since childhood. At university, she studied zoology and botany and was able to spend time with a group of exceptional ornithologists at the University of Cape Town. Her first twitch was to see the Australasian gannet in the Cape Gannet colony, which I thought was fantastic. I love that. Back in the UK, she continued pursuing her passion for birds, working on grey partridges and black grouse. In 2012, she moved to Tasmania, and before long started coordinating the wader count for northwest Tasmania, as well as becoming the secretary of BirdLife Tasmania. Fantastic. In addition, she is also an admin for the Facebook group Women Birders Australia, and I'm so pleased that she's agreed to come on the show. Please welcome Karen Dick. How are you, Karen?
I'm very good, thank you very much.
Lovely. Thanks for the time, and I hope you're doing well. And you're in Hobart at the moment. So what's it like down there at the moment? What's the weather like?
Oh, well, everybody always tells you how bad the weather is in Hobart. But I moved from Scotland, so you can't scare me with a bit of weather. And we've just had a fabulous couple of weeks anyway, so it's glorious down here, always, pretty much.
The reason I ask is because I'm in Coffs Harbour, and it's very Scottish weather. I actually lived in Scotland as well as when I was younger, in Glasgow. And, you know, my mum always says, oh, this is Scottish weather, you know, because it's just rainy and miserable. But we're not here to talk about the weather. We're here to talk about birds, because, you know, this channel is all about the joy of birds. So what about birding brings you the most joy? Is there a particular aspect of birding that you really engage with?
I think there's actually a few. I find it very hard to be a specific type of birder. For me, initially, actually, the joy of birding was being able to get out. I had a really bad car accident in my early 20s, and I was actually restricted to living or to the house. I wasn't allowed out for a year, and I wasn't allowed to drive. So getting out and being able to go and see a bird became quite special, and I've never really lost that. I love surveys, I love surveying, I love citizen science, but I really love watching someone get the bug or sharing a special moment with someone and seeing the whole birding thing click for them. So that's quite special to me, and I do some nature tour guiding, so I get to enjoy that fairly regularly. But I think, honestly, the joy of birding for me, the most special joy of birding is that it's something that's available to everybody. If you play tennis, you actually have to play it in a certain way. You've got to play it with certain equipment, and it's all very rigid. But birding, you can actually do in any way that floats your boat. There's the photographers, the listers, the sound recordists, the patch birders, the twitchers, the ornithologists, the lot. And you can take it anywhere. You know, when I moved from the UK to here, it was just a new, exciting opportunity to do the same thing that I'd been doing for 30 years. So that, to me, makes it incredibly special. There's not many hobbies or jobs that you can actually do it your way so easily. So that, for me, really does it.
Yeah, I love that. That's really a complete kind of overview of birding, I think. And, you know, it's a way to classify the world around you and categorize the world around you in a sense, especially when you were mentioning the surveys. I've thought about this a lot, you know. Maybe as human beings, we're just looking for a way to understand the world, and birding gives us that satisfaction of, okay, I know what this species is. There's 30 of them over there on the sandbank, and, you know, there's a couple of oyster catchers over here. So it kind of, you know, makes us understand the world in a, perhaps in a what's the word, in a superficial sense, maybe, but it's still understanding and classification. I really like that aspect. Great answer.
But it also expands your vision, because those 30 birds you're looking at on that sandbar might be the kind that actually then migrate to Siberia. And then that brings in another whole part of the world to understand. And those links between how the world changes and how what you're seeing in the birds is the result of things that are going on in the world. And actually that later on in one of your questions, you talked about something about birding and what we can learn from birds or birding. And that was something that had struck me, that they are a barometer of what's happening in the world around you, if you pay attention.
An ecological indicator, I think, is a way to put it too. Yeah. Fascinating. And so to bring it down to your more personal level, I know that you had a very kind of specific childhood relationship with birds. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about how at home you connected with birds?
Yeah, so it was funny when I was looking and sort of reading through your questions and thinking about how I got into birding. I don't think I'd ever really paid much attention to how I had started. And then I remembered there was a talking cockatiel in the house. How cool is that when you're little and the bird goes, hiya, in the house? It hated my dad because my dad was away at sea a lot. And so when he came home, the bird took exception because, you know, he was in mum's space. So there was that. We had an aviary in the garden and I bred Japanese quails, ground nesters, but my folks had other birds, including Guldian finches in the aviary. And I got to see these fabulous looking birds behave in different ways from my quail. And so I didn't realize that those things were sort of sinking in. And my mum was a rehabber for the local penguin group. And so it was nothing to come home from school and find a penguin in the bath. Wow. Or a gull wandering around the kitchen. So I was immersed in ways I didn't really pay attention to at the time. But I think it all just sort of started to come together. And then, you know, every time we went out, it's very easy to bird wherever you are, whatever you're doing, sitting in the back seat of the car as we drove, watching black-shouldered kites on telegraph poles and realizing over several years that I wasn't seeing them as often as I'd seen them in the beginning. And so, yeah, I think I was always a bit birdie, really, just without necessarily realizing it.
I love that. And so where did you grow up exactly?
So I'm from the UK and I was born in Hampshire. I come from a long line of sea-going seafarers. And then when my dad came home from the sea to stay, we moved to South Africa. And then I did a portion of my growing up there and I went to university there. And from there, I went back to the UK after university because they didn't want to let me go to Antarctica. And I wanted to work in Antarctica, but I was a woman. And so that was my first experience of not being allowed to do something because of gender. And coming from the UK, it actually hadn't ever entered my head that I wouldn't be allowed to do something based on gender. And at that point, I went back to the UK.
Wow. So that's really surprising to me because South Africa in my head, you know, I've never been there, but I would imagine that they have kind of a relatively Western way of doing everything. That's really amazing.
Yeah, more now, I think. But in the 80s, you know, girls were still expected to get married. That was their sort of purpose. And I remember my mother not being allowed to sign a bank document for a car loan. And so there was always that two-tier society for women there through the late 70s and 80s. But I just hadn't realized that it might affect me. And it took them another 9 years after I had left before they allowed women to overwinter in Antarctica. The UK, the US, Australia were already doing that, but it took South Africa a little bit longer to come to the party.
I see.
And I wasn't prepared to wait that long. So I went back to the UK. Unfortunately, never ended up working in Antarctica even then. But, you know, it leaves a life's goal.
I do want to touch on when you went back to the UK, because I know that you met a very good friend there, that you shared a house, and there was, amazingly, the other person was also a bird watcher, and that's, I love that. I want to touch on that a bit, because it can be such a fuel for friendship, I think, bird watching. It's happened, you know, it's happened to probably to everyone listening, it's happened, you know, and I love that. So how did that happen? Did you just kind of say, oh, you're a birder, I'm a birder, let's go birding? Or was it kind of more gradual?
It was actually a bit more gradual than that. We didn't choose each other. We both had a job on an estate and were told, you have the job and it comes with accommodation, but you have to share with somebody.
Right.
And so we both arrived a couple of days apart and sort of tiptoed around each other for a little while. And then I saw that she had a pair of binoculars. You know, as you do, you're a birder, so your binoculars are on the lounge table or, you know, somewhere easily to hand. And so we started talking about them, and we talked about, because I'd never been a formal bird watcher in South Africa. I'd gone with the birders on that twitch up the west coast, and I'd done some survey work, and I'd worked on penguins for a contract, and I'd worked on gannets for a contract, but I'd never formally gone bird watching. And she was definitely, so she'd been in the UK always. So she was like, we were on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, and North Norfolk was just this sort of jewel beckoning us. So we went up to the North Norfolk coast, and that was the start. And then after that, every opportunity and every holiday, every time we were both on leave, we would take a birding trip around the UK, mostly to Scotland. And that was 1990. So we're, 30 years down the line, and we're still best mates. She still lives in the UK, and we still Skype every week.
Wow.
And she did come out here just before COVID. She got back just before COVID in 2020. And about half of every weekly Skype touches on what we've been doing birding wise. And we went round Spitsbergen for my 50th.
Wow.
I'm a big believer in you've got to do something epic on big birthdays. And then I discovered that I've got more epic trips than I've probably got big birthdays left. So we've had to condense them to not just big birthdays, but epic trips whenever you actually can. So for my 50th, we went round Spitsbergen together, came together from 2 different countries, left our families behind, and just hung out like we used to do 30 years before. So
yeah,
it's very special. It's lifelong. And pretty much not all my friends, but a vast bulk of my friends in Tassie are the birding community. And I think that's one of the other joys of birding. You find your tribe. In the real world, I'm a bit of a nerd and a bit strange. But when I'm with my birding pals, oh my God, I'm perfectly normal and I fit right in. And I think that's one of the really special things about hanging out with birders. You're all just as nuts as one another, and it's fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's just that special wavelength that you can only get with other people who understand the passion. And it's really so great to have that connection. It's a privilege, I like to remember that we should be grateful for being birders, because it's such a gift. And so to kind of continue with the chronology, you moved to Tasmania 10 years ago this year, 2012. And so
yes.
What I'm interested in is the difference that you saw with birding here as opposed to in Europe, or indeed South Africa. We could talk about that as well. But I really, for some reason, every episode I kind of get back into.
So the first thing I noticed, I went on a twitch, and I actually remember taking a photograph of this twitch for white-plumed honeyeaters just south of Hobart, and I was the only person there. Now, I've never done the really enormous twitches in the UK, but there was a hooded merganser 20 minutes from my house in Scotland, and there were a couple of hundred people there.
A couple of hundred?
And to realize that
wow,
there are not a couple of hundred birders in Tasmania was something that struck me really early. So that was very noticeable. And we are a very small band of birders in Tassie, which is lovely in one sense because we all know each other really well. We all help each other out. We all, a couple of weeks ago, there was a Pacific call turned up way up in the north.
Wow.
And 4 of us jumped in the car and went up looking for it. So that's very special about Tassie. But yeah, certainly the scale of birding, the difference in scale I found really noticeable when I first came. I use my telescope far less here than I ever did in the UK. Some of that, I think, has to do with there's a lot of private property here that you don't have access to. In Scotland, there's no law of trespass. So you can walk outside of people's gardens. You can walk pretty much wherever you like. And so I think there's less accessibility here. But there are some awesome habitats. 20 minutes from me, I can be up Mount Wellington in the bush or the rainforest. I can be down at a Ramsar wetland. I can be out at sea. It's just, you have everything. It feels like everything's really close to you down here. And so your opportunities are huge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So talking about Tasmania as well, the fact that it's physically and geographically detached from the mainland also, I guess, contributes to the special community that you have down there. I've never been to Tasmania, but all the endemics and the different habitats.
So we have 12 endemics in this, tiny little pimple at the bottom of Australia is something special. I find it fascinating because there are things that I don't understand why we don't get here. Why do we not get ospreys here? It's not like latitude-wise we're out of their range because you get them in Scotland at 54 degrees north. We have these massive freshwater bodies stuffed full of trout, but we don't get ospreys. And yet ospreys are migratory in a lot of parts of the world. So it's not like they couldn't get here. We don't have willy wagtails and magpie larks and things. So there are just these barriers. That Bass Strait is more of a barrier than I perhaps expected it to be, given how close the mainland is, really. And we do get the vagrants from across the water. So we had a rufous whistler that came back to the same man's garden every year for 3 years.
Wow.
Before it disappeared. In the same week, pretty much, in spring, this rufous whistler used to turn up in his garden. So things do get here. We had a pelagic trip where we had a spangled drongo fly past out at sea off the continental shelf. Yeah. So, it's an interesting place to be.
That's fascinating. Always, just as a side note, I love those kind of crazy pelagic stories where you see just a random essentially terrestrial bird out at sea. I love that. I just find that awesome. And so about the habitats, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, do you have a particular favorite habitat that you particularly enjoy birding in at all?
I do, and several people know me, and I think they would not be surprised that I am an absolute pelagic tragic. I love the ocean for a multitude of reasons, but I go on every pelagic that I can possibly get out on. And there's several reasons. One, it's a real link to my family. I come from generations of seafarers.
Yeah.
My aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, my brother, my father, everybody has worked at sea. And when I was back in Scotland, I had an opportunity. I did a lot of seabirds at sea surveys and whale and dolphin surveys for marine life. So I have managed to sneak in to the working at sea world. But for me, there's that link to my family. There's that anticipation. You actually have to make a real effort to go on a pelagic. And when you're stood on that dock, the anticipation of what you might see out there, because when you're standing on the dock, you can't see those birds out beyond the shelf, the big elves and things that you're going to travel for 2 or 3 hours to get out there where you have a chance of seeing them. And then you look at these birds and, they're the top of the class. They're the largest wingspan of any bird. They're the furthest flying birds. They're the oldest birds in the world. Seabirds just do it on a multitude of levels. And so for me, absolutely. I've done more than 100 pelagic trips in Tasmania in the last 10 years. So I am a total sucker.
Wow, fantastic. That's brilliant. I love that. Yeah. There's so much to kind of unpack about pelagics because it's such a different way of birding. Like we were talking about different ways of birding at the beginning, but like this is kind of an outlier, because I just love it. I absolutely love it. And are you a big user of eBird when you go out pelagic birding?
When we're pelagic birding, I'm a really bad eBirder. And the moderators down here will attest to that. I don't eBird all the time. We tend to eBird all of the pelagic trips, and we share that list with everyone that's on board because it's a really convenient way of making sure everyone gets that list. And it helps. We do an annual summary of the trips, so it's an easy way to find them. I don't always use eBird on land. I had a couple of bad experiences early on where people were stalking your eBird records to go and see something, usually something rare somewhere. And I worry a bit about individual birds that get that level of attention. And so I'm a little bit more cautious about how and when I use eBird, but I do love the fact that it's there and usable and contributes to science and contributes to analysis and understanding of what's happening with the birds in the world. So I'm not a competitive birder. So the thing that annoys my friends most is that I do have lists on eBird, but it means that my tallies, that eBird gives you all these tallies of, what birds you've seen in what counties and who's the top of the tree for that. Mine isn't accurate. And so it annoys my competitive friends wondering where I'm actually at in relation to them on the eBird scale. And I can't help that because it's not that important to me. And so I don't make any effort to keep all that up to date.
Yeah.
I still keep my actual bird list on an Excel spreadsheet, but I'm an old girl, so I was keeping lists on Excel spreadsheets for 30 years. So
yeah, no, I do the same. I'm a big eBirder, but I also like to kind of have the complete kind of Excel spreadsheet with all of the birds of the world, and then it's kind of cleaner in a way to have that as well. For me, anyway, I think it's quite nice to have the whole list. But so the main problem you have with eBird, I guess, is conservation related. So Is that right? Mm.
Yes, I think that's probably true. I think where the information is being used for conservation by experts who know what they're doing. And from that perspective, in Australia, Bird Data provides that same forum, I guess. It's more the ethical birding side. And I get why people are excited and I get why they want to go and see something that's rare. But I struggle a little bit with worrying about how those people are then approaching that bird. And if that same poor individual is being disturbed multiple times in a day because of something I've put on eBird, that bothers me. So I don't do it. It doesn't change a lot in that obviously other people are putting them on eBird, and so people can get that information from other sources. But I just feel slightly better that it's not coming from me.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Yeah, it is kind of, it's so multifaceted, isn't it? The whole digital revolution with birding as well. You have Facebook, like lots of Facebook groups popping up everywhere in the last 5 to 10 years, and now that's kind of a big thing. And yeah, it's difficult to navigate a little bit, but
it is. It can be, yeah. But I'm an old-time birder. I have a camera, and I have a good camera, and I do take photos. But sometimes I forget to take the photo because I'm so busy looking at the bird through the binoculars. And then after it's gone, I think I should have taken a photo of that. But also, you can't have a rare bird anymore and get it accepted, its identification accepted now without a photograph, which is a massive, 30 years ago, if you were a birder with 30 years experience in that field and you said, I'm pretty sure that was a whatever, people would actually accept that. Now, we have some phenomenally excellent birders in Australia, and even they don't get stuff through without photographic ID. So you suddenly have to have added a whole dimension to your birding in order to fulfill other people's requirements now. Which doesn't always sit well with me, especially because actually sometimes I just forget to take the picture. So yeah. Well, that was one of that's one of the kind of recurring themes of the podcast as well. The kind of, I don't want to say war, but the war between photography and birding proper with binoculars. And war is not the right word to use, but no, it's not the right word.
But it kind of illustrates,
it's a dichotomy.
Yeah, it kind of illustrates the fact. Yeah, illustrates the fact that there is a kind of dynamic going on where you have to kind of, at the end of the day, choose what the priority is for you. Yeah. We always say that you can't be a birder and a photographer at the same moment. You can be both, but at any one moment in time, you are probably one or the other. Because one of the benefits photographers have is they're much better at patience and slow birding, because they will spend the time. They will spend an hour trying to get that perfect shot of whatever the bird is. Whereas a birder, unless it's doing something special, after a portion of time, will move on and keep moving. And we'll look at it through the binoculars and get a fantastic view from 100 yards away and be delighted. And that will be enough, but not if you're a photographer. And so I think it's a bit like being a botanist and a birder at the same time. You can't look down at the ground for the orchids at the same time as you're looking up for the birds. On any given day, you actually have to decide how you're going to bird today. And I don't actually have a problem with that, because some days I'm doing surveys. Some days I am birding for sheer joy. Some days I'm showing other people birds. So I reckon everybody can bird in a multitude of ways, and should bird in a multitude of ways at every available opportunity, and just make it fit with wherever you're doing. When you're driving across the bridge and you see a peregrine falcon, you don't go, I'm driving, that doesn't count. You actually go, oh, wow, it's a peregrine falcon. I'm birding and driving at the same time. How good is that? Not many things you can do two things at the same time. So absolutely. That's a great point, actually, that I don't think we've touched on in the show before. There's like that you can be a different type of birder at different times. That's brilliant. Great insight. Yeah. And it also allows you to vary your own exposure to the birds and nature and learn more things, as well. And so, but that kind of links in also to the next question I had, which was more specifically about a specific moment or amazing cherished memory that you have about birding, in which you were birding, or indeed maybe photographing a bird, or what memory stands out to you in your birding journey?
I think anyone who's been birding for a while has a multitude of those, because I think birding is actually made up of just a series of moments in your life, and they touch you. All of them touch you, but then occasionally there's one that just changes your life. And for me, there was one that distilled all of that crazy childhood stuff with birds into that moment where I thought, I want to work with birds. I want to know and understand birds. And I wasn't birding. We were driving up the west coast in South Africa, and I saw something happening in the field next to me. And I asked my parents to stop, and we stopped. And what it was a secretary bird, and it was killing a snake. And so what I had seen was this bird leaping up and down, this huge thing with massive long legs that I'd never seen before, leaping up and down. And yes, the secretary bird killing a snake. And at that moment, that sense that this was a bird doing something I'd never actually even imagined a bird might do. You know, why would you actually take on a poisonous snake with your feet? And I was just blown away. And that, you know, that was beginning of the 1980s, and it's still with me now. And it changed the course of my life. It made my career, my hobby, and everything all just blend into that one moment.
Amazing, incredible.
So, yeah, very special. Yeah.
I remember, you know, one of the main reasons I kind of got the bird bug is thanks to David Attenborough, his older stuff about, you know, life of birds, trials of life, and all those kind of that I grew up with, essentially. And I have my parents to thank, you know, for having shown us all these amazing documentaries and you know, but he was my hero. And I remember seeing on one of those a secretary bird, and what a cool bird, what a great bird. Oh, that's fantastic.
They are pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's like cassowaries over here. They just have an aura that is unlike any other. And there are those individual special birds around the world that, you know, you probably do want to see at some point in your life if you can. So
yeah.
I haven't seen a cassowary, by the way. So one of the things about only having been here 10 years and having a child, when I arrived, my son was 4. And so there's a lot of Australia that I haven't seen yet, and is just waiting for me to have that larger amount of freedom to go looking for. So there are a huge number of Australian birds right up there on my list of things I'm going to go and look for as soon as I don't have to put parenting first.
Yeah, that's right. Well, actually, that's one thing that I also am interested in, is balance between home life and the birding passion. How do you do you have any tips?
So in your question, you said the balance between work life and birding life. If you ask my husband, he'd tell you there's none. It's all about birds all the time, because when I'm not working with them and surveying or birding for fun, I'm adminning the Facebook page for the women birders, or I'm being the secretary for BirdLife, or I'm running the outings for BirdLife, or I'm volunteering to do something else. So
yeah,
birds occupy an awful lot of my time anyway. So my husband would tell you there's no balance. It's all just there. But one way to get around that is actually to make your hobby your job, because then you have the perfect excuse for doing your hobby all the time as a proper job. And so that's what I did. And so I got the benefits of both worlds. The one area where it probably does get impinged a little bit is that I am not always free when a rare bird comes up, because I'm everything. I'm an ornithologist, I'm a twitcher, I'm a birder, I'm if there is a way to do birding, I'm doing it, just not all at the same time. But there can be occasionally something special turns up, and I'm just not in a position to go and look for it. So I dip some things just because actually I have to prioritize something else instead. And I'm sure every birder, every twitcher has those moments. But luckily, once your kids leave home, hopefully there are less of those and you get to go and play more often.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It is difficult for us birders sometimes, isn't it, to kind of find the right balance, and especially like you say, if your work is unrelated to birding, then that's a lot of your time dedicated to something that's completely unrelated, and that makes it perhaps even harder to kind of balance it. But yeah, I think there's a lot we can do to. Well, I don't really know. I just like wondering about it, because it's a lot. I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are familiar with that, with struggling to find the time or maybe the energy to go birding after a long week of work, or yeah.
But that's where birding is special as a hobby compared to some other things, because you can sit in your lounge, in your sunroom and bird. If you don't have the energy to go out, you can still look out the window and see a bird doing something. This morning I watched a mother Pacific duck trying to shepherd 6 couple-of-day-old ducklings across the road from the river to the plot next door. Very boring bird, very cool behavior. Calling them back, trying to worry about the cars and things. You have to find the joy in the moment that you're in. I think if you pin all your hopes on going out to go birding, you'll be disappointed, because there are the days after a long week at work when you just can't be bothered. And it's not that you can't be bothered, but you're just tired, or you've got to do other stuff. So take those birding moments where you're at, and in that moment, bird, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, sitting at the traffic lights, sitting in your house, and remember the joy in those, because that'll take you through until the next time you do have the opportunity to go and do something a bit more epic.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. I up here we get a lot of blue-faced honey eaters, and they frolic about in the banana trees at the back there, and it's such a joy. It just kind of lightens the moment straight away when I just see, oh wow, oh, it's a nice moment. The difference with being at home, I suppose, and is that it's not. It's you sometimes it's incidental that you see a bird from the window, and I like that, because it just kind of lifts up it gives you a little kind of uplifting moment of the day, and you mentioned so this is kind of, we're taking the kind of format of giving tips maybe to listeners, or to new or young birders, and so I wanted maybe also to kind of see if you had any tips for birders starting out, not necessarily young birders, but also young birders, people who are just kind of getting interested, because I'd like to offer this platform also as that, and maybe you can also chat about how to encourage new women birders, and how to get around that. What are your thoughts on all that?
So my first and favorite tip, and it's one that I found helped me when I moved back to the UK, is be an apprentice. If you want to be a great cabinet maker, you don't only learn it from books. You use those as tools, but it's absolutely extraordinary if you hang out with someone who, with a lot more experience than you, and particularly experienced in the habitat you're in or the birds that you're in. The things they will tell you that you cannot find in a book. So I noticed it when I first started working on grey partridges. I was working with a guy who just finished his PhD. And these birds were flying away. And in the UK, there's grey partridges and there are red-legged partridges. And they look quite similar at a distance. And they'd fly away and he'd go red-legged partridges. And eventually I said to him, Simon, how do you know that? And he said, oh, well, do you know, when a red-legged partridge flies, it keeps its wings horizontal. But when a grey partridge flies, the wing tips tip down. And so they have a more hunched appearance. Well, I'd never seen that in a book. And blow me down, the next bird I looked at that flew had a curved shape to the top with the wingtips going down. And I went, it's a grey partridge. And he went, yes. That is the kind of stuff you don't get out of a book. And when I came to Tassie, hanging out with the birders here that are so generous with their time and their expertise, what I realized is that you haven't really got it here and anywhere in Australia, anywhere in the world, until you know where in a tree to look for a bird. So I'm not looking for Tasmanian scrub wrens at the top of a tree. I'm looking for them at the bottom. But that's also not something I could pick up the Australian Bird Guide and find out. Hanging out with people who know is the best way to do that. So for anyone new to the hobby, I say find a friend, be an apprentice, just listen to people that know. My first pelagic over here, I was extremely fortunate to be out with Rowan Clark, who just pointed out stuff to me, and it all makes sense. Once someone points the information out, it makes sense and it helps you the next time one comes along. So be an apprentice and really embrace being an apprentice. You will never regret it. For women, I love seeing women birding. When my mate and I first started birding in North Norfolk 30 odd years ago, we were a definite oddity. Firstly, a lot of people assumed we must be gay because we were two women birding together, which had never entered my head and was very weird. But we had to put up with a lot of comments for years and years and years, actually, as we birded. So I'm quite passionate about women, and Tasmania is fabulous. Often on our pelagics, we have more women on the boat than men. So we have a huge group, well, relatively speaking, proportionally, we have a lot of women birding in Tassie. And then I got involved with Janine Duffy, who you've had on your program, and the Women Birders Facebook page. And I think for women, I'd probably say be sensible, be prepared, and be competent, so that the act of being out there as a woman doesn't interfere with the birding. And so we've actually found that there's a lot of women on the Women Facebook page that would feel more confident if they knew a little bit more about, say, navigating in the bush or those sorts of issues, how to be safe out there. And so we're actually running within a few of the states, we're actually running a day of upskilling, of competence training, not because women aren't competent generally, but actually often they're not confident. And improving their confidence opens up more birding opportunities to them. And also for women, what we're finding from the Women's Facebook page is it's allowing women to actually connect with other women birders and start to have little adventures and little trips and meeting up to go birding in certain places. So make sure that you are sensible, competent, prepared, and then just get out there. That would be my advice.
Yeah, for sure. And make sure you enjoy it as well, I suppose, is another one. Because,
well, I guess if you're not enjoying it, you're not going to go out. I find it hard to imagine anybody going out and not enjoying it.
Yeah.
And it gives me such a buzz whenever I go out. It horrifies me, the thought that people might go out and might not enjoy it. And I think being prepared and competent actually helps that process. You know you can do it. And then that leaves everything open to just enjoying it.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with everything. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's a whole world, and it's changing fast, I think. You know, it's not like, I wonder if you could even categorize it as the same hobby as it was maybe 30, 40 years ago, because there's so much more tools that we have at our disposal now, and and the books are so much better now, the field guides, and it's sometimes I see those very old field guides, and it's like, wow, how did they ever manage to ID stuff with this, but the fact is that it's an evolution, isn't it, of skills, of the illustrators getting better, and the research getting better, and that the whole birding hobby is on an arc. It's on a journey upwards, I think. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, it is. It's tremendous, and so that keeps it fresh for everybody. For those of us that started decades ago, there's still new ways to enjoy it. There's new skills to learn. Audio recording now. I've got a couple of friends that do audio recordings, and that just, to have that as a resource now that we didn't have back then. I remember I'm the world's worst at mimicking bird calls. I don't have a musical ear. My husband, who's not a birder, but plays music, is much better. He can identify stuff by sound because it just makes sense to him. Now it's much easier because now there's an app called BirdNet that will record a song for you in real time. And then if you've got signal, will analyze it for you and give you a level of some suggested identifications. Now, how fantastic is that for a non-birder who doesn't even know where to start? Most birders here would go, oh, that'll be one of the honey eaters, and they know where to start. But if you don't even know where to start, there's now an app.
Yeah, there's an app for everything these days. Yeah. Yeah.
And the apps get better and better. There were some fairly dodgy apps early on. The apps just get better and better.
Yeah. It's just like an evolution. I love that. It keeps things fresh, as you said, and it kind of it rolls the ball forward, and it keeps engaging as well, I think, for people, and so we're going short on time, so we'll have to go with a closing question soon. So I always love this part because I just love the different answers I get and the reactions. So, Karen Dick, what's your favorite species of bird?
Yeah, I think for anyone who's been birding a long time, that becomes an incredibly difficult question. There's always the classic answer is the one I'm looking at now is my favorite. And this last weekend, I did the Northwest Wader count, and I added a new species to my Tasmanian list, and I got greater sandplover. So, wow. But over a lifetime, jackass penguins were my first introduction to, the weirdness that could be birding. So I do love penguins. Grey partridges, they took up 7 years of my working life. It's hard, and they lay more eggs and hatch more chicks than almost any other species in the world. So You can find something incredibly special about just about any bird. But ultimately, I think for me, my favorite bird is a grey-backed storm petrel. This tiny little thing that's the size of your hand that hangs out there in conditions that we as humans with all our technology can't even get out to. And they live out there and survive. And they look so joyful, skipping around in these mad waves out there. So I think my favorite bird probably has to be a grey-backed stormy.
Yeah, that's a great choice. Great choice. I remember seeing those also off the coast of Portland in Victoria. They're lovely, and the shade of grey is just perfect. It's just so beautiful, and that's a very good choice. Excellent. And of course, it would be a pelagic bird.
Oh yeah, well.
Lovely.
Yes.
And do you have a destination that you haven't visited yet that you absolutely will be going to whenever you can for birding?
Don't we all? Yeah, of course I do. So Antarctica, obviously, chance to see emperor penguins. I'm a bit of a penguin lover, so I've seen quite a few, and we're lucky in Tassie that they pop up here to molt sometimes, some of the subantarctics, but I'd love to see an emperor penguin. So Antarctica is always, and I've been to the Arctic, so that is high on my list. But early in my time back in the UK, I worked, when I was working on grey partridges, my boss was Swiss and a statistician, and he went to Costa Rica on his honeymoon birding. And that was probably the first time I had ever really encountered the idea that you could actually make an entire holiday out of birding. And of course, he came back, and he being Swiss and a statistician, he was extraordinarily annoyingly accomplished at everything. And so he had phenomenal photos and had seen, 940 species of birds or something in his 3 weeks, because of all the different habitats. You go from coastal up into cloud forest and down again. So South America, Central America, with all those hundreds. I've been lucky enough to go to Ecuador and the Galapagos, but I only saw 400 species in Ecuador out of 1,600. So
a quarter. Wow. Amazing. But
Costa Rica, I think, but it does have to be somewhere that I can persuade my husband to go. You don't get to take birding holidays on your own. You have to make your holiday fit into a family holiday. So.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with that. My wife is a non-birder, and sometimes it's difficult to kind of balance let's go here, and I sometimes pretend it's, no, look, it's really beautiful, there's a nice beach, but yeah.
You are not alone. In Ecuador, I made everyone go to the Galapagos, the whole family, so all the kids and their partners and what have you. So we all did the Galapagos, but then we went into the rainforest, and the deal was I got to bird between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. And 8 a.m. was breakfast. And then the rest of the day was family holiday. And so that's how we made that work. And I think if you're a birder, you find ways to make it work. So
absolutely, yeah. The passion finds its own way if it's pure.
Yes, it does.
Absolutely, yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, that's a fantastic note to end on. Thank you so much, Karen. It's been such a joy. Thank you. What a great episode.
Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.
Lovely, lovely. So I'll hopefully, when I get down to Tasmania, I'd love to do one of those. It's got a legendary status, the eagle hawk neck pelagic. Is it the one? Is that the one
Indeed.
that you?
Yep.
Oh,
and we're doing 2 this weekend.
Wow.
But yes, just let me know when you're coming. I'm sure we can make a plan.
I'd love that. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you.
Terrific. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Birding Today podcast. New episodes are released every Friday, and if you'd like to get in touch, just write an email to birdingtoday@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.